It's time now for Addiction-Free Radio with your host, Jann Scott. If you or someone you know has a problem with alcohol, drugs, codependency, or eating disorders, we'd like to hear from you. Here's the phone number, 303-457-9952. If your call is long distance, let it ring, and we'll answer when we can put you on the air. Jann will be taking your calls in just a moment at 303-457-9952.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jann Scott. Welcome to Addiction-Free Radio. This is the Wednesday night edition of Addiction-Free Radio. In a few minutes, we'll have with us here in the studio for the next hour, actually by telephone, John Bradshaw, who is, of course, the author of Healing the Shame That Binds You. John is also the person who does the PBS series, Bradshaw on the Family. He is with us by telephone in Beaumont, Texas, where he is getting ready to do a workshop tomorrow. Before we talk to John, a few comments on last night's show. There was quite a reaction to that. I received quite a few phone calls, actually, at my house. We had Daniel Sheehan on from the Christic Institute, where he talked about the tremendous amount of cocaine that was being brought into the country by our own government. And for those of you who know about the Christic Institute and that whole scenario, I just want you to know that we will have Daniel Sheehan on later, and you can call or write to me here at Addiction Free Radio if you'd like to get more information on him. A lot of you wanted to know his address and all that kind of stuff. So you can write to me at Post Office Box 869, Boulder, Colorado, 80306. And we will have Mr. Sheehan back on, certainly within 30 days, to give us an update on the amount of cocaine that's coming into the United States and how that happens. Okay. John Bradshaw has a book out called Healing the Shame That Binds You, and tonight we'll talk about whatever you would like to ask him. We have him on the phone, so if you have any questions you have for Mr. Bradshaw, maybe you've read certainly some of his books or his series, and if you've been hanging on to questions about, well, what about this? You know, when you've been watching his series and you never felt you got an answer, you can call here at 457-9951, and we'll take your calls anytime during the program. John, welcome to Addiction Free Radio.
Well, thank you, Jan. I'm glad to be on your program.
Yeah, this is great. We just made it by the... you're on a very busy schedule, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
What in the heck are you doing?
I'm very, very busy, and I'm real glad that we made it here tonight in time. I was getting real worried.
What are you doing? I mean, what sort of schedule are you on? What kind of training?
Well, I run a treatment center in Los Angeles, for one thing, so I have that going a fair amount of the time. I'm talking to my head therapist there and being sure the quality of treatment is, what I want it to be. And then I'm in Houston at the Center for Recovering Families, where I do the Healing the Inner Child 6 times a year, and I do a couple of lectures a month. And then we're doing a lot of fundraisers around the country for PBS stations who've run the Bradshaw on the Family series, and then I have people in various parts of the country that just put on workshops for me. So it's been quite a incredible 2 years since the Family series really sort of got out there and on the PBS stations. We've just had a incredible response to it, and like 100,000 letters, and we're getting 50 letters a week, and it's just hard to keep up with it, and I haven't really been prepared for that kind of response.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. I think something's really happening in the country right now, a kind of a consciousness that my particular series was at the right place at the right time and touched that consciousness and conceptualized it. There are a lot of other people that could have done it, but I just happened to have this series on PBS that conceptualized what a lot of people are going through in their lives and gave them some names for things that they just didn't have any tags for.
Yeah, I've heard the very same thing from people such as yourself, like Terry Kellogg or Ann Schaefer or Melody Beattie, that say the very, very same thing, that once they go public and start talking about the things that are in this recovery movement, there's a tremendous reaction. What's your treatment center in Los Angeles?
We have a codependency treatment center in Los Angeles. We're going very slow with it. We have about 20 beds, and it's based on what I think codependency treatment should be, which is really a kind of intervention. And that really what's important about codependency treatment is the ongoing treatment. But some people need a kind of a 15 to 30-day jolt to help them to really get out of their delusion and denial. And then we do a lot of original pain work, getting people into their feelings and helping them to deal with what I think is the setup for addiction, the shame-based feelings. And that until those feelings are expressed and connected with, that a person will keep acting out. Like I'm a 25-year recovered alcohol addict, right, and other kind of prescription drugs. But after 7 or 8 years of recovery, I was still acting out compulsively. I was working compulsively and smoking compulsively and off and on eating compulsively. And so I really hadn't healed my compulsivity, even though I'd stopped drinking. And what Carl Menninger used to call the disease of the disease. Like alcoholism is a man on fire running into the sea to put out the fire, but drowning. And that once you get him out of the sea, that is, get him out the bottle, get him off the wet stuff, there's still the disease of the disease, which is codependency, or what my word for it is, at the core of codependency is this toxic shame, which is a disdain for yourself at the deepest level, a belief that you're flawed and defective, or you're something's wrong with you at some deep level, and that has to be covered up. So basically, that's what has to be dealt with, is that deep inner core of self-split.
It seems to be taking some time to have this penetrate our society, people in mental health, in government, in social services. At least from where I sit, a lot of our professionals look at what we're talking about as substance. It's alcohol, or it's the drugs, or it's the this or that. Certainly not codependency. I mean, we hardly have a context for that here in the country.
Yeah, we really don't. I mean, I know you have been, and I have been terribly frustrated being on panels, talking in universities where I'm with people that only talk about the pharmacology, they're only talking about the pushers, they're only talking about the chemicals. And I ran the Palmer Drug Abuse Program in Los Angeles for 4 years and tried to raise money for it. And what I found that worked the best is if I could help people get it, that our addictions in this country are not just about addicts in alleys or kids smoking pot or cocaine or alcoholics in bars. They're about damn near everyone in the audience can relate to addiction in some way. Work addiction, religious addiction, buying addictions, feeling addictions, mood altering through rage instead of dealing with hurt and pain, or being addicted to sadness instead of dealing with your anger. There's massive addiction in our culture because the rules that we've used to raise children are shame-based rules. They're rules that shame us. They spiritually wound us. You can't be who you are. If you feel angry, you can't be angry. If you feel sad and you're a man, that's being a wimp. If you have an idea of your own, you're told, don't you ever come in this house with an idea like that. So that your I amness is wounded very early on, and you have to develop a false self in order to matter. Well, once that false self is set up, then people are set up for addiction, because all addictions are about a bad relationship. And all addictions are pathological relationships to some mood-altering substance, experience, or thing that has life-damaging consequences.
Let me tell my listeners who my guest is, who you are. My guest is John Bradshaw. He's the author of the book that is out right now called Healing the Shame That Binds You. It's out on it's out on Health Communications, isn't it? That's right, Health Communications. It's available actually everywhere. John Bradshaw was just here in Denver a couple weeks ago doing a workshop. You're with Jann Scott this evening here on Addiction Free Radio. The talk number is 457 9951. 457-9951 is the number if you're calling from out of state or out of the area. It's area code 303-457-9951. If you ever had a question for John Bradshaw and you wanted to ask it, now's your chance, okay? You have his undivided attention without lots of people crowding around. So get your calls in now. We do have a couple of lines open. The number's 457-9951 for John Bradshaw here on Addiction Free Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about how shame binds us. We'll be back after this.
Addiction Free Radio. You can talk with Jann in just a moment at area code 303-457-9952. If you're calling long distance, let the phone ring. We'll answer just as soon as we can put you on the air. Addiction Free Radio is the only regularly scheduled talk show on the globe that we know of, broadcasting information for those suffering from an addiction. Jann will be back to answer your questions in just a moment. We are now taking phone calls at area code 303-457-9952. Jann will be back in just 2 minutes.
I'm Jack Sheridan, and I am an alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic, and his father. The difference is I found treatment. I've not had a drink in 3 years. A fourth generation? I don't know. My son left home during my last drunk. I hope he's all right. If only I could tell him. Treatment does work. Don't let it happen to your children. Please call. Help us help you.
Call Family Recovery Center's toll-free 24-hour confidential helpline at 1-800-322-HOPE. That's 1-800-322-HOPE.
Okay, we're back here on Addiction Free Radio. You're with Jann Scott this evening. My guest is John Bradshaw. He's with us by phone from Beaumont, Texas. If you call tonight and the lines are busy, you're going to have to keep trying. We only have a couple of lines. They are all filled right now. So 457-9951 is the talk number. And as soon as you hear somebody hang up, my suggestion is you dial it immediately if you want to get through. Okay. You know, John, I had a question for you. What is the name of your treatment center out in Los Angeles?
Well, it's called the Life Plus Codependency Treatment Center.
Life Plus
Codependency Treatment Center.
In Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And the other question I had, you were talking about compulsivity and the fact that you were running around the country. I wonder, how are you doing? Are you working compulsively? Or I was just curious as to how, you said the past 2 years have been incredible, and I was just wondering how this was all affecting you.
Yeah, I don't think I'm working compulsively as much as just a lot of circumstances have happened in my life since that series came out, and the first book on the family, and then the shame book. These books have sold 500,000 copies in a year and 2 months, so
wow.
It's been incredible response. And I took all of March off and really got into my own inner place, and I took a couple of weeks off in February. So I'm taking care of myself. It's just that doing what I do is stressful. There's just no way around it. You can't get on airplanes and fly as much as I do without it being stressful. But, I've got a real good support group, and I do, take care of myself.
Yeah, I wondered people, I'm sure people often would think that, I wonder if this guy who talks about this stuff actually, does it himself. So that's, I kind of threw that out to you.
Well, it's a good question. One of the requirements for our therapists in Los Angeles is they have to be in their own recovery programs. And I don't believe we should be talking the talk if we're not walking the walk. And I think that's one of the great contributions of the 12-step programs is and the great contribution of understanding toxic shame and codependency is that we realize how many people have gravitated into the helping professions out of their own caretaker codependency issues. and how many people then can be getting sicker and sicker as they function taking care of other people.
I know I've certainly done that. I mean, over and over and over again, had to learn that lesson the hard way until I finally, wow.
Yeah, I
Still
did
doing
it for the first 10 years of my counseling practice, because I was in a 12-step program for recovery from alcoholism, but I hadn't even looked at the codependency, toxic shame issues.
Let's do this. Let's go to the phone. We're going to talk to Mary from Denver. Mary, do you have a question for John Bradshaw?
Yes. I've seen you on TV a number of times, and I really like what you're putting out, Mr. Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mary.
And I'm glad to talk to you.
Thank you.
I have a question about estrangement from my family of origin. I have lived 2,000 miles away from them for many years. I left when I was quite young, right after school, and I've had a very interesting life up until the last 8 or 9 years, where my husband took a hike, and since all I have left actually is a few relatives and a sister and a brother. Now, there's no alcoholism in my family of origin, but there is some abuse. I was not abused physically, but there was verbal abuse, and I come from a critical, unaccepting family. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I left. And there's no way to talk about anything with my sister or my brother. They either withdraw completely or say they don't want to talk about it, or they get hysterical, or they just can't talk about anything of an emotional nature. And this is the way we were brought up. There was no way to deal with conflict or anger, and you were just supposed to be compliant. And they're all I have left, actually. And I'm wondering, is there any way to heal this this gap, or should I just forget about it?
Well, it's a very tough question. I think that it's very difficult when you're in your own process of recovery to deal with your own family. I certainly have had that experience myself, and what I decided to do was just to accept my family the way they were. They know what I'm doing. And I've, over the years, been very much involved in trying to get them information and talk to them about it, get them into treatment. But in my family of origin, no one has done any treatment other than myself. And I have to have very strong boundaries with them. I have to have a very strong support group, and I keep my relationship with them to, what I can comfortably handle. And that is not a whole lot some of the time. But it's just impossible to try to change people who are not willing to change. So, my advice is to have what you can have with them without compromising your own reality and without being sucked back into the family system abuse and dysfunction. And that, no one can tell you exactly what that is. The more you have your own support group, your own people that you can talk to and give you support, and therefore have a boundary, the better you're going to be able to handle that.
That was a good call. Okay, we have another line open here, 457-9951. If you have questions for John Bradshaw, give us a call here, 457-9951. You can jump in now. We do have one line open. If you're out of state, it's area code 303-457-9951. 303-457-9951 is the talk number here on Addiction Free Radio. My guest, of course, is John Bradshaw. The book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, it's out on Health Communications. It's out all over town. Let's talk about this this binding. Can we do that, John?
Sure.
How shame binds us, and the other thing too is as you were talking about the setup for addiction, a lot of times I'll hear on psychologists or psychologist talk shows, a lot of times people will say, all this business about addiction, I think we've just kind of gone overboard about it. And I'd like to know what your reaction is to a statement like that. I'm sure you must have heard those before, too.
Yeah, I just did an interview that's supposed to be a special on NBC sometime in August, I believe, with Maria Shriver, where she was basically, setting up that argument, it's now become fashionable to get into 12-step programs, and isn't it just meaningless now because everything is now being looked at as an addiction? Mm-hmm. I think that we're at a stage of higher awareness, and that because of the leisure and because of the crises, and I say because of the experience of really 2 world wars and Nazi Germany, which embodied the highest principles of technology and even of Christianity and even of brilliance and excellence, that when we realized that how a Hitler could have happened in Auschwitz and Dachau, that this is not something that's just local or topical. This is something rooted in our cultural history. And what we've come to understand, I think Nuremberg was the end of an era. We came to understand that the set of rules that we've been using to raise children that have been reinforced by religion for the most part are rules that shame children, that tell them certain feelings are not okay, or that certain feelings are weak, and that adults are the masters and children are the slaves, and that basically parents own children, that those rules reach their apex in Nazi Germany.
I often, we're going to go back to the phones here in just a second. People oftentimes ask me, and I often say, remember we live in the 20th century, and think about the amount of alcohol, drugs, licit and illicit drugs that are consumed in this century compared to the last century.
Yeah.
Some experts say it's 100 times that of any time ever before.
Yeah, and it's not, but again, it's not just that. People are killing themselves with knives and forks and starving and vomiting, and they're killing themselves with the work, and they're killing themselves in lots of different ways. One other thing you mentioned is that, see, shame has been called the master emotion. That's why it binds all the other emotions. Shame is an emotion that is developed before, really, it's pre-verbal. So that what happens with these rules is that when we have rules that say, for example, anger is an unacceptable feeling for children. It's okay for parents to be angry, but it's not okay for children to be angry. It's not okay for children to be angry at their parents. Then what happens is that your anger gets shamed. It gets bound by shame. In our culture, little boys aren't supposed to cry, so crying gets bound by shame. Fear. If you go to school and cry or you're afraid, you get shamed. And in many families, my family, you couldn't be too happy because there were starving children in Latin America, or so joy even got shamed. So shame, all the feelings get bound in shame with these rules, so that whenever you feel anything, you feel shame. That's what I mean by the healing the shame that binds you. And people's needs get shamed. Often in dysfunctional families, the times when you were the neediest is the times you were shamed and hurt the most. And so, like, for example, when I feel very needy, I feel ashamed. And a lot of men feel that, and a lot of women feel that. When they're needy, they feel ashamed. So your needs are bound in shame. Your emotions are bound in shame, and your drives, your sex drive, your eating drive gets bound in shame. Because sex is shamed in families. Kids are exiled to the dinner table and shamed at the dinner table.
Let's go to the phones. Okay, speaking of shame, we got phones lit up everywhere here. We're going to talk to Lisa from Englewood. You have a question for John Bradshaw?
Yes. Hello, Mr. Bradshaw.
Lisa.
I've seen you a lot on TV, and I really agree with what you say.
Thanks.
Totally. I got a problem here. About 2 years ago, I started having severe panic attacks.
Yes.
And it drove me to a nervous breakdown.
Yes.
And I discovered that I had been sexually abused.
Yes.
I always had this suspicion, but I didn't want to believe it. My question is, I've been in therapy, and what she tells me to do is not working. I just can't seem... I get to a certain point, and I can't break through. I wondered if you'd have any suggestion on...
Well, I hate to, make advice when people are with therapists. Sometimes, however, you can come to a point in therapy where you're just stuck. I mean, I got stuck with clients, and a lot of times it was that I could take a person as far as I had gone, but I couldn't take them any further.
Yep.
And sometimes at that point, it may be worth trying working with someone else. It might be, worth getting in a survivors group. You do a different kind of work. You write about the episode or episodes and share that with other people who have been violated.
One thing I did want to say that I really have a strong feeling about is before, when I started going to this therapist, everyone tried to put me on medication.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's not the answer. And I just want to tell anybody out there that don't let them fill you full of drugs.
Yeah.
That's just, I believe that's just covering up the problem, because I have some friends going through with panic attacks, and they're on all these drugs, and it's not helping at all.
Yeah, in so many cases, panic attacks are reenactments of severe violation in your childhood, often sexual violation. And so they make sense. It's what we call the logic of absurdity.
Yeah.
They make sense when you know what happened. And it's like in our center in Los Angeles, we put people in treatment under the diagnosis of depression because we don't have insurance for codependency or shame right now. But a lot of times we get real arguments because we're not medicating our depressed patients. Because we believe that the only way they can deal with it is to deal with the original pain and do the feeling work and get connected to the feelings. That's what will help you. Because those feelings are so overwhelming when you've been violated, and as a little girl you had no allies. There was no one you could go to and have an ally. So you had to, what happened is all those emotions just got frozen there. So anyway, that's a real, I underscore that too. I really support you in what you're doing, and I would be cautious about changing your therapist because it's real slow work dealing with incest.
Lisa,
it's such a violation.
I have a question for you, Lisa. Are you in a survivors group now?
I was in a group, but everyone kind of fell apart, and that's when I started going into private therapy.
There are other, you need to know that Denver and Boulder have a lot of incest survivors groups going on, and very good ones at that.
Oh.
Okay, and in fact, if you leave your phone number here with Mark, I will get a list mailed off to you and get you connected up with some people that are involved in survivors groups, okay?
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay, and the other question is your therapist in recovery?
I don't really know. I don't know. I don't know much about her.
Okay, and are you going to any 12-step programs yourself?
No, this isn't a 12-step program, no.
Just some things to throw out to you to look at, 12-step programs maybe for yourself. And I always wonder, too, is a therapist in recovery? That's a good call, though.
Okay, well, I thank you, and I thank Mr. Bradshaw.
You're welcome.
Very much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You're with Jann Scott this evening here on Addiction Free Radio. The talk number 457-9951. If you're calling from out of state, it's 303-457-9951. My guest is John Bradshaw. He's author of the book Healing the Shame That Binds You. It's out on Health Communications, available at bookstores everywhere. Well, what do you want to talk about now, John? I mean, we can talk. I know. I wanted to ask you about healthy shame versus unhealthy shame.
Yeah.
If we can...
Well, a lot of people don't like that distinction. I've had a lot of flack about, what I wrote about in the book there. But
let me give the phone number. Can I do this? We have a line open here. If you have a question for John Bradshaw, you can jump in right now at 457-9951. It's 457-9951. We've got one line open. If you have a question, if you've been thinking about, gee, I'd like to ask John Bradshaw a question, we've got him on the phone here with us for another half hour. Okay, go ahead.
The reason that I maintain the distinction is that I think that everyone needs a sense of shame. I don't think people need very much shame. It's like It's just that emotion that lets you know that you're limited, that you're not God, that you need help, that you can and will make mistakes. For example, 12-step programs restore people to healthy shame. They say we're powerless, our lives are unmanageable. They say when we're wrong, promptly admit it. They say we need to make amends, we need help, we need to pray and meditate. In other words, a 12-step program is focusing for people their healthy human limitations. They're healthy human limitations. So we need to maintain that there is a healthy sense of shame. Now, what happens is that healthy sense of shame becomes internalized, and then it's no longer a feeling of limits that just the blush when you've left your keys in the car or your flies unzipped or whatever. It now becomes a state of being, so that you become ashamed and you feel like you're flawed and defective and that there's something wrong with you.
You know, sometimes I hear people take this concept to an extreme where there should be no shame, or there is no shame, or there is no judgment, there is no right, there is no wrong, everything is whatever.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing that really taught me the healthy sense of shame was my being in a 12-step program, that it really restores you to get it, that if you want to rejoin the human race, that you are limited and you need help and you need God as you understand God. Because addictions are spiritual bankruptcy. They're rooted in toxic shame. And what happens then is that when people are toxically shamed, it's so unbearable that you have to cover it up and you become shameless.
Let's go back to the telephones here. We're going to talk with Ivy in Arvada. You're on Addiction Free Radio. Do you have a question for John Bradshaw?
Yes. I just want to, first of all, thank you so much for coming to Denver. I'm here with my support group. We're all listening to you right now.
Oh, thank you.
What kind of support group is it?
Well, it is a structured support group. A psychotherapist leads it. And we just been, some of us been together for about a year and a half, and we've watched your programs multiple times and read all the books, and we go to the workshops, and we want to encourage you to come back to Denver, and I want to know when you will be coming.
Well, I don't know for sure. Winston Laszlo is my contact there with with KBDI, I think Channel 12, and we will come back for sure next year, but it hasn't been decided yet. Somebody wrote me a letter that my jokes were getting old and that maybe I needed to work on some new material. I certainly know that my jokes can get old, but I love the people in Denver, and I really enjoy being there, and I've had tremendous support from you all, and I really appreciate it. So we'll be back next year, but I don't know when.
Oh, good. Well, I went last year, and I wasn't quite with it, but I went again this year.
Yeah.
And I think I was really in the here and now, the whole program.
Great.
So much more out of it this time.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this when we did it on relationships.
Yes, that's the one I went to.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing that with people because I think, again, that addictions are abortive pathological relationships.
Yes.
They're set up by bad relationships.
Yes, yes. And on that topic, I have another question. Our therapist suggests that we really avoid being in an intimate relationship while we're doing this healing work. And I want to know what you have to say about that.
Well, I think that's real good advice. Again, for how long, I don't know. I mean, I've seen people go 2 years without being in a relationship, 3 years. I don't know what the length of time is. I think there's a point where you've got to go ahead and get in a relationship, because the only way you're going to work out a relationship is by being in one. But when you don't have any boundaries and you're so vulnerable, and you're in your shame issues, codependency issues, or relationship addictions especially, it's really important to back off and stay out of relationships until you can work on your family of origin issues, building some better boundaries, the kind of things we did in the workshop, learning to say no, express anger, fighting fair. Now, you can work on that with a sponsor or with a support group like you're in, which are relationships. So you're really working on relationships. The hard thing to know is to tell you exactly when it's time to go on out there and risk a relationship, an intimate relationship with someone, like we normally think of an intimate relationship. But I generally agree with that, to stay out of it until you've built some boundaries.
That was a good call, Ivy. We have one line open, 457-9951 here on Addiction Free Radio. You're with Jann Scott this evening. Out of state, it's area code 303-457-9951. My guest is John Bradshaw. He's with us by phone from Beaumont, Texas. He has a book out called Healing the Shame That Binds You. It's out on Health Communications. John, one suggestion that someone made to me once that really worked is that if you concentrate on having a relationship with God and a love affair with God, it'll really help in all of your other relationships. And that's something that I actually practiced. It was sort of like a relationship with who?
Right.
A love affair with who? What are you talking about?
Yeah, right.
And when I tried it, it was really it was amazing.
Well, I studied to be a Catholic priest, and when I came out of the seminary, after 9.5 years, I was very disillusioned. And when I went into my 12-step program, which was about 1.5 years after that, and they started talking about God as you understand God, I had a degree in theology, I had taught theology, and I really reacted. And I remember one night sitting in a meeting and hearing these guys that I really respected talking about turning it over and really trusting, letting go and letting God. And it just almost knocked me over that they were totally on the level, that they really did this. And I started doing it, and it really worked for me too. And in my book, I have a chapter on, how the 12 steps heal toxic shame, and I use the genesis story of 4 broken relationships. That what that account in the garden says is we broke the relationship with God, that broke the relationship with ourselves, that broke the relationship with our brothers and sisters, that broke our relationship with the world. It's interesting that the 12-step programs start right with, we believe that something greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We made a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God as we understand God. That is, they move right back into reestablishing the relationship with God as you understand God. So I think that I totally support what you've said there.
Yeah, it's really a mystery because we keep, at least for myself, I kept going around looking for people to fill up this need for love and to be loved, and it was almost like God was a concept, not like a person or a reality.
Right.
Let's go back to the phones. We're going to talk with Randy in Littleton. Hi, Randy. You're on Addiction Free Radio. Do you have a question for John Bradshaw?
Yes, I do, if I can keep my voice from shaking too much.
Well, it's okay.
I was in a 10-year marriage that was, to me, it was not a good marriage. There were 2 children as a result of this marriage. My ex-husband moved out of state, and my older boy, who's 10, moved with him. And I'm in a position where I really don't want to move out of state. The younger boy is with me. But this seems to be so catastrophic to any family. And I am just really concerned by staying here. Am I destroying a relationship with my older boy? Or is it more important for me to go down there and somehow maintain some sense of family, even though there isn't a family? But
well, I think you just said it. I mean, that you're going down there to maintain an illusion because there really isn't a family. See, a lot of people try to stay together for the children, and that really doesn't work. What's important is to try to have whatever you can have with your son, a quality letter writing, letting him know that he matters, that you love him, but that you also matter to yourself. That if you don't love yourself and have a life of your own, you can't really love your children, because what you're modeling for them is the same thing we're talking about as therapists or helpers not walking the walk. That if we're not modeling what we're trying to teach other people, then they learn what we're actually modeling. And the children learn what you're actually modeling. If you go there to give up your reality to take care of the family, then you're modeling not having a reality. So I think it's very important for you to work on you, and also to have as quality a relationship with your son as you can, which means writing him, letting him know you care about him, that you think about him, visiting him whenever you can. That would be what's important.
Well, how do I deal with the fact if he holds me responsible for not moving down there, for somehow this was an abandonment issue for him?
Well, it's sometimes you just can't right now. All you can do is keep saying, that I do love you, but I love myself too, and I need a life. And that if I don't have a life for myself, then I really can't work out a life with you. And sometimes it seems very, very selfish, because we've been brought up with very codependent principles that say, even though the Bible says you love your neighbor as you love yourself, that you really can't love someone else if you don't love yourself. We've thought of any kind of self-actualization and self-love as something that's taboo. And he will just have to come to understand that you have a life too, and you need to model for him that you have a life, and that you have a life and you can love him. You can love him without having to give up your life.
My guest this evening is John Bradshaw. The book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, out on Health Communications. You're with Jann Scott here this evening. When we come back from this break, we'll take more of your phone calls. All the lines are filled right now. As soon as you hear somebody hang up, you can try to get in. We've got 15 minutes left here in the program. The talk number 457-9951. We'll be right back after this break.
Addiction-free radio. You can talk with Jann in just a moment at area code 303-457-9952. If you're calling long distance, let the phone ring. We'll answer just as soon as we can put you on the air. Addiction-free radio is the only regularly scheduled talk show on the globe that we know of, broadcasting information for those suffering from an addiction. Jann will be back to answer your questions in just a moment. We are now taking phone calls at area code 303-457-9952. Jann will be back in just 2 minutes.
Over 300 people have died along the Front Range since 1987 as a result of domestic violence. This is Jan Mickish, the director of the Colorado Domestic Violence Coalition. Men and women involved in domestic violence are in denial about the violence, the drugs, and the alcohol. Help for the victims and perpetrators is available. Call now, 800-333-SAFE. That's 800-333-SAFE. I travel the world and the 7 seas.
On Addiction-Free Radio with John Bradshaw. John is with us by phone this evening from Beaumont, Texas. He has a book out called Healing the Shame That Binds You, out on Health Communications. Let's go back to the phones. We're going to go to Bob in Gold Hill. Hi, Bob. You're on Addiction-Free Radio. Do you have a question for John Bradshaw?
Good evening. Yes, indeed I have. I've been listening with considerable interest to the program this evening. I was wondering if Mr. Bradshaw sees any connection between his concepts of addiction and toxic shame and political extremism of either the left or right. And if he does, whether he has any suggestions for treatment or prevention of that kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, I definitely see a connection. I haven't thought that through as well as I would like to. For example, in both of our political parties' conventions, I didn't see a moment of healthy shame. You know, people standing up and talking about, I'm limited and I need help. We sort of make presidents and don't let any limits be shown or any flaws be shown. And that's very frightening. I think the extreme right and the extreme left are often acting out cover-ups for shame. But it's an area that I would like to, my answer to how to treat it would be treating shame, creating families that are respectful families where people are valued, really democratic families, really truly democratic families where everyone is considered equal and having equal rights, although, children have proportionate rights. But it's a very good question, and I know that it's one of the most important areas of our life. It's just an area that I've been so busy focusing on putting out fires, I haven't had a chance to think that through as I would like to.
457-9951 is the talk number. You're with Jann Scott this evening here on Addiction Free Radio. If you're calling from out of state, it's area code 303-457-9951. If the phone's busy, just keep trying. My guest, of course, is John Bradshaw this evening. You were talking about in your book, and I guess what my question to you is, what's so bad about working hard, about wanting to be the best at something? Shouldn't we try to be the best that we can? And I think when you talked about toxic shame is the root of all addictions.
Yeah, well, I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to be the best that we can be. There's something wrong, though, in thinking that we can be perfect. That is, that we can get to a state where we never make a mistake, or that we're never going to make a mistake, or that as humans that we can have unlimited power, for example. We've had a lot of books that have basically been almost bestsellers promising unlimited power. And I think that's a very, very dangerous concept. That when human beings don't get what I'd call their natural finitude, their natural limits, and start thinking that we can be unlimited, there's some real dangers. Now, on the other hand, I think within our limits, for example, musicians are limited by the diatonic scale, but we have Beethoven and Mozart and the most beautiful creations. Our artists are limited by their canvas and by the colors of the paints, but look at what has been done with that. So we have enormous creative potential that each one of us could, spend so much more of our energy on.
That's great too, especially for a compulsive person to try to be even more perfect. You know what I mean? Where you can really take that to extreme lengths. I certainly did that. I went to every workshop you possibly could do that was about do more.
Right.
And end up feeling worse, at least for somebody like me.
Perfectionism is one of the major cover-ups for toxic shame. And perfectionism has no boundaries, just as toxic shame has no boundaries. Toxic shame says, there's nothing about you that's okay. Perfectionism says you can never really get it right.
Right.
So neither one of them have any boundaries.
Let's go back to the phones, okay? We'll talk with Rich in Denver. Rich, you're on Addiction Free Radio. Do you have a question for John Bradshaw?
Yes, thank you. First of all, John, I'd like to thank you for the work you've done in this area. It was through your TV series that I first found out about 12-step programs and got involved about a year and a half ago in one.
Great, Rich, thank you.
Made a big difference in my life.
Wonderful.
My specific question is, you had mentioned on your series and in your workshops that you came to the 12-step program after you left the seminary.
Yeah.
And started dealing with many of your issues after that. Now, I spent about 10 years in a monastic situation, and so I'm starting to grapple with the emotional and sexual issues that are starting to come to the forefront of my consciousness at this point. Did you, in your work, run across any associations or support groups specifically for people in that situation?
No, and it's one of the most painful things. When I came out of the seminary, I also went into, a 12-step group, and often I had no one, even in the 12-step group, that I could talk about the experience of being in the common life, the monastic life. I don't know what to tell you about that. I think there's some unique aspects of that experience that really need to be shared by other people that have been through it. And I don't know, it's probably going to have to be created more than there is something ready-made for it, because there really isn't that I know of. I have people at every workshop that will come up and tell me I was in a monastery, or I'm an ex-priest or an ex-nun, or I almost was a priest or almost was a nun, or whatever. I'm a minister, I was a minister. There's a whole different kind of subtlety there of perfectionism and shaming that I think really it needs to be looked at.
One thing that I've come across is there are more and more now Christians becoming involved in 12-step programs, and they have a tendency to sort of band together and address the kind of question that you're talking about, whether they be ministers or priests or people who were in extreme fundamentalist churches or had certain vows that they've taken. I've come across a great deal of myself having been confronted with the very same situation that you're talking about.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of shaming and covering up shame with religiosity. The feeling of righteousness, or judging other people, or condemning other people, or talking about being saved and others are not saved. There's tremendous danger in that, of isolating and separating and then hiding our shame with that and interpersonally transferring it to other people. So it's an area that is tough, because like I'm working on a book on religious addiction. It's down the line. I have about 3 ahead of it. But I taught the psychology of religion at Rice University for 3 years, and all the work of Allport, Gordon Allport at Harvard, on extrinsic and intrinsic religion, and where we've seen Rajneesh and the sort of the intellectual commune, and then we've seen the Swaggarts and the Bakers and all of this stuff. And there's massive religious addiction in our culture. It's one of the hardest to deal with, because it's the hardest to focus the life-damaging consequences. People say, well, how could this be life-damaging? I'm just loving God, or I'm committed to Jesus as my personal Savior. It's so dangerous when it's an addiction.
About once a month, we do a program here on exactly what you're talking about. And I bring in people who work specifically with people who end up being caught up in religious cults, whether they're Christian or otherwise, talking about exactly what you're talking about. And the phones really go crazy when we do that.
Oh, I bet. Well, I want to tell you how impressed I am with this program that you're doing. And, that a program like yours exists, Jan. I just think that is fantastic.
Well, thank you. Do you know what really surprises me, John, is that this is the only one like it in the country?
I know it. I've never heard of one like it. I think it's fantastic.
And there's a lot of fear by networks or other stations to do something like this, and I kind of have a theory, and I think it's around the denial. What's that man was asking you about governments and addiction? We talk about community denial, and then you expand it out further into political party denial, and all that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But thanks for the compliment. I have a hard time still taking compliments. I like to bat them back,
I understand. I very much understand that.
Let's go to Debbie in Denver. Hi, Debbie. You're on Addiction Free Radio. Do you have a question for John Bradshaw?
Yeah, I am a developmental psychologist, and I teach parenting for a psychology department at a local college here in Denver.
At Metro State, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I have been in therapy for the past 2 years, so I've been working on a lot of these issues, and I have a couple of stepchildren, so I'm one of these people who's in recovery and able to teach a lot of these students, although they're supposedly going into parent ed and stuff. I try and get them in touch with the pain of their own childhoods and their parent tapes, and try to help them make a conscious decision to practice nonviolent democratic parenting. But I had one of my students in particular this past semester really couldn't get past how do you deal with your anger when your kids are pushing your buttons. And, we talked about expressing your anger in constructive ways and that sort of stuff, but he couldn't, this impulse control, and how can I, in a classroom setting, help people deal with this issue? How to keep calm when your kids are pushing your buttons?
Well, I think the answer is you can't always keep calm, but there are ways to express that anger, that are, even if a person is in high voltage, if they can say and stay in self-responsible statements, I'm upset, I'm angry about what's going on, and not calling the kids names, or you stupid oaf, and the kind of things we know that damage children so badly.
Right, and I try to give them those skills, and we talk about communication skills and building self-esteem and things like that, but it's like, how a lot of these people, and I can understand this, the low impulse control kind of person, and yes, they've been in class and they learn these skills, but they have a hard time putting them in practice. And how could I help them with
Well, I think that it is hard. It's like practice, though. It's like we never learn these things. The things that we're all carrying around with us are the things that we were taught and that we've practiced for years and years. And so what I tell people, it's like learning to hit a backhand in tennis. It requires a lot of practice, and that's all I know is that when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I'm caught off guard is the time I'm most prone to go back into those old automatic patterns. The more I practice I-messages and self-responsible statements, the more that begins to integrate into my life. And that's all I can tell people. It's very hard to raise children, and you have to be really healthy to do it. And lots of us weren't when we were raising children. So, they can do the best they can, and it's not that they're not going to get angry. It's more the way they do it.
John, I want to thank you, for being with us on the program tonight. And we're just about out of time here.
Thank you for having me, Jan. I'm real glad we could work it out. I think what you're doing is just tremendous, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate that, and you too. I have another question for you, and that is, what, maybe in closing, I would like to ask you about what you see happening in the future in the addictions recovery movement. What do you see happening on down the road in terms of either treatment or anything? I'm just wondering if you have any visions, that.
Well, I probably am a little biased with the work that I've done, but one of the things that we realize so powerfully, like even in our treatment center, is how people do not know how to set up non-shaming environments. I mean, we have night nurses shaming our patients and hospital administrators shaming our therapists. That I think I would see the future as really understanding what it means to value people and not shame them. I mean, lots of times people think they're doing good and they're actually shaming people.
That's a hard one to unlearn, too.
It's a terribly hard one because it's so ingrained in everything we do in our culture.
Well, we have to get out of here, and
well, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, have a good one. We'll talk to you again.
Okay, thank you, Jan.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. John Bradshaw, Healing the Shame That Binds You. It's been our guest this evening, books out on health communications. You've been with Jann Scott here on Addiction Free Radio. We are on every night, 5 nights a week, at 9 o'clock, from 9 until 10. We always take your calls, and we generally almost always have guests. Wednesday night, as the way it's working out, is people of note that we have on, usually on Wednesday night. So we'll be back tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, right here on Addiction Free Radio.
You've been listening to Addiction Free Radio with your host, Jann Scott. Jann invites you to join him every night at 7 on most of these same stations. If you would like a cassette copy of tonight's show, send $3 check or money order in American currency to Jann Scott, Addiction Free Radio, Post Office Box 545, Lyons, Colorado, 80540 USA. That's Box 545, Lyons, Colorado, 80540-USA. Jann also welcomes any ideas or suggestions you might have. If you know someone who needs this radio show, even though they don't know they need it, tune in with them any night at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, right here on the Addiction Free Radio Network.